Hello and welcome to this week's lesson, or JAM and WAG revision in economics. So today's topic is theory of consumer behavior. As I mentioned in the previous class. So under theory of consumer behavior, we're going to cover the following. We're going to look at utility concepts, so total utility, average utility, and marginal utility. We're going to look at the law of diminishing marginal utility. We're going to look at consumer equilibrium and the effects of price changes on consumer equilibrium. And then finally, the demand curve. So let's start with utility. What is utility? Utility is the amount of satisfaction that a consumer derives from the consumption of a commodity at a particular time. So don't mix utility up with externality, because externality is the satisfaction or dissatisfaction from the consumption of other people, not your own personal consumption. So utility, as I mentioned, is when a person derives satisfaction from a commodity directly consumed by him or her. Disutility is when a person derives dissatisfaction from a commodity directly consumed by them. Whereas a positive externality is when a person derives satisfaction from a commodity indirectly consumed by him or her, so by somebody else. And a negative externality is when they derive dissatisfaction from a commodity indirectly consumed by them. So I mentioned that we're going to look at total utility, marginal utility, and average utility. Total utility is the total satisfaction derived from consuming a given level of a commodity. It's derived by adding all the satisfaction from consuming a given level of commodity. Sorry. So to calculate it, we'll say total utility is essentially the average utility times the quantity of the products that you consume. Marginal utility, on the other hand, is the extra satisfaction that you get from consuming an additional unit of a given commodity. So let's say that you had, you consumed a piece of cake and your utility was 10. Then you consumed an extra piece of cake and your total utility increased to 12. Your marginal utility would be derived by subtracting the preceding total utility from the present total utility. So we'll do 12 minus 10, giving your marginal utility to be 2. Average utility is just what it says, or what the name, I guess, suggests, is the average. It's the amount of satisfaction that a person derives from consuming 1 unit of a given commodity. So you take the total utility and you divide that by the quantity of the goods that the person has consumed. So there's a relationship between total utility and marginal utility that I suggested earlier on. And these are some extra facts to know. So when total utility is increasing, that means as you consume more of a good, your utility continues to increase, then your marginal utility will be positive. When your total utility is constant, meaning as you consume more of the good, your utility isn't increasing, then your marginal utility will be 0. And then finally, as your total utility is decreasing as when you consume more of a good, then your marginal utility will be negative. So the law of diminishing marginal utility. This states that as more and more units of a particular commodity is being consumed in a given period, the total utility increases, but it increases at a diminishing rate. That is, with consumption of all other goods being held constant. So an important thing to note here is that the law of diminishing marginal returns is the reason for the downward sloping demand curve, but we'll get to that slightly later on. So things that you need to note about the law of diminishing marginal utility. When you're calculating this, all units of goods must be homogeneous. So let's take the cake, for example. What we're saying is that each slice of that cake that you're eating must be the exact same. So you can't try to calculate marginal utility by eating a slice of carrot cake and then eating a slice of, vanilla cake afterwards. So that's what that point is stating. Then prices should remain constant. You can't calculate utility if the price of the cake, for example, is decreasing or increasing. The good should be divisible. And then finally, an assumption that we hold is that the consumer must always be rational. So let's look at what an indifference curve is. So we've been talking about utility so far, and an indifference curve joins together all the points that represent different combinations of two goods that yield the same utility. So let's look at this table on the left-hand side here. So what we're saying here is that, we have bread and we have gala. If you eat, I guess, two quantities, or let's use slices, 2 slices of bread and 8 pieces of gala, you have a certain utility. If you decide to change that and do combination B, eat 4 slices of bread, but 6 slices of gala, you would still have the exact same utility as you did earlier. So what this is showing you is that these are all the different combinations that you can do that would yield the exact same amount of utility. If you plot it on the graph on the right-hand side where we have gala and bread, you can see that A, B, C, D, E, we can join those points up. And when we join those points up, that is your indifference curve. So each point on this indifference curve, any point you land on would give you the exact same units as another point on the indifference curve. Let's look at your budget line. So this budget line, what it does is that it shows you the different combinations of two goods that a consumer can afford, given their income, given their salary, and the prices for the two goods. So again, let's look at, here we're looking at apples and beer. So if we say I earn, let's say 20,000 Naira a month. With my 20,000 Naira, I can buy 2 apples and 5 bottles of beer. That is one, I guess, bundle of goods that I can buy. Instead of buying 2 apples and 5 bottles of beer, I could also buy 4 apples and 4 bottles of beer, or 6 apples and 3 bottles of beer. So far as the apple and the beer remains at the same price, each time I would be spending all of my money, all of my salary will be able to be split up between apples and beer. So if we look at the graph on the right-hand side, we've just plotted the points from this table. And what it's showing you is that all the points on this line represent all the different combinations of beer and apple that I can buy with my salary. So we have to look at what consumer equilibrium is. And this is, I guess, the equilibrium of a consumer is a situation in which his satisfaction or utility that we've been looking at from spending his income on various goods and services is maximized. So the reason why this is following next is because we've looked at utility, which is your satisfaction, and we've looked at your budget